When Isabella Rodriguez fled her father's mansion in California, she never imagined that changing her name and answering a mail-order bride advertisement would lead her straight into the arms of danger and love. Pretending to be Irish Mary O'Sullivan, she thought she was escaping an arranged marriage to a cruel Spanish nobleman. Instead, she found herself trapped by a corrupt judge's scheme to steal a silver mine fortune. But sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, in the form of a scarred mine owner who sees past her lies to the truth of her heart. This is a story of forbidden love that crosses cultural boundaries, of courage that shines brighter than silver, and of two broken souls who discover that healing is possible when hearts unite against impossible odds. If you love tales of romance, deception, and the power of love to conquer all, you won't want to miss this incredible journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories that will transport you to the untamed American frontier. Spanish heiress, disguised as Irish woman, finds true love. With scarred Colorado mine owner, Isabella Rodriguez had never stolen anything in her life. But as she crept through the moonlit corridors of her father's hacienda with a carpet bag full of borrowed clothes and forged documents, she felt like the most accomplished thief in California. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she made her way toward the servants' quarters, where her loyal maid Maria waited with horses and the final pieces of their desperate plan. "Señorita," Maria whispered as Isabella slipped into the small room. "Are you certain about this? Your father will be furious when he discovers you've gone." Isabella looked at her reflection in Maria's small mirror and barely recognized herself. Gone was the elegant Spanish lady in silk and lace. In her place stood a simple Irish woman named Mary O'Sullivan, dressed in plain cotton and homespun wool, her glossy black hair hidden beneath a modest bonnet. "My father will be furious regardless," Isabella replied, practicing the Irish accent she had learned from the O'Malleys, a family of Irish servants who had worked for the Rodriguez family for years. "If I marry Don Carlos Mendoza as he wishes, I'll be dead within a year from that monster's cruelty. This way, at least, I have a chance at happiness." Maria crossed herself and shook her head. But to answer a mail-order bride advertisement, to travel to Colorado territory and marry a complete stranger, "Señorita, this is madness." Isabella tucked the carefully forged letter into her bag, a response to an advertisement placed by someone in a place called Silver Creek, Colorado. The advertisement had sought a refined lady of good character for marriage to successful mining gentlemen. It had seemed like providence when she found it in a San Francisco newspaper, a chance to escape her father's plans while maintaining some hope of a decent marriage. Madness would be staying here and marrying a man who beats his servants and treats women like property, Isabella said firmly. "At least in Colorado, I'll have a chance to choose my own fate." The escape from the Rodriguez hacienda went exactly as planned. Isabella and Maria rode through the California night, their horses' hooves muffled by cloth to avoid detection. They reached San Francisco at dawn, where Isabella took the name Mary O'Sullivan and purchased passage on the first train east. The journey to Colorado territory took 5 days and tested every ounce of Isabella's determination. Traveling as a simple Irish woman rather than a wealthy Spanish heiress meant uncomfortable accommodations, plain food, and the constant fear of discovery. But it also meant freedom from the suffocating expectations and deadly arranged marriage that had made her life unbearable. As the train climbed into the Rocky Mountains, Isabella pressed her face to the window and marveled at the wild beauty of the landscape. Towering peaks covered in snow, deep valleys carved by rushing rivers, forests of pine and aspen that stretched as far as the eye could see. This was a land where a person could reinvent themselves, where the past mattered less than the courage to build a new future. Silver Creek, Colorado proved to be a rough but prosperous mining town, perched on the side of a mountain like an eagle's nest. The streets were crowded with miners, merchants, and the kinds of colorful characters that the frontier attracted. Isabella felt both excited and terrified as she stepped off the stagecoach, her assumed identity feeling fragile in the face of such a dramatic change in circumstances. She was met at the depot not by a mining gentleman, but by a well-dressed man who introduced himself as Judge Harrison Caldwell. His smile was polished and his manner courtly, but something in his eyes reminded Isabella uncomfortably of her father's business associates, men who smiled while calculating how to profit from every situation. "Miss O'Sullivan, I presume?" Judge Caldwell's voice carried the authority of his position, but also an undertone that made Isabella's skin crawl. "I trust your journey was not too arduous." It was long but bearable, thank you, Isabella replied, maintaining her Irish accent despite her growing unease. I was expecting to meet Mr. She paused, realizing that the advertisement had never actually specified the mining gentleman's name. Ah, yes, there has been a slight change in arrangements, Judge Caldwell said smoothly, taking her arm and guiding her toward a waiting carriage. The gentleman in question has found himself otherwise occupied. However, I believe I can offer you an even more advantageous situation. Isabella's blood ran cold as the judge's meaning became clear. This was not the honest arrangement she had hoped for, but another trap, another powerful man seeking to control her fate for his own purposes. What sort of situation? Isabella asked, though she dreaded the answer. Marriage to myself naturally, Judge Caldwell replied as if this were perfectly reasonable. As a federal judge in Colorado Territory, I can offer you social position, financial security, and the protection of law and order. Surely you could ask for nothing more suitable. As the carriage rolled through Silver Creek's busy streets, Isabella realized she had made a terrible mistake. She had fled one forced marriage only to find herself trapped in another, this time hundreds of miles from home, with no family or friends to turn to for help. But she had not survived 26 years as the daughter of Don Carlos Rodriguez without learning something about dealing with powerful men and their schemes. Isabella had inherited her father's intelligence and her mother's diplomatic skills, and she would need both if she hoped to escape this new predicament. Judge Caldwell, Isabella said carefully, surely such an important decision deserves proper consideration. I would not wish to enter into marriage hastily, especially with someone of your distinguished position. The judge's eyes sharpened with interest and perhaps approval. A wise response, my dear. I can see that you are a woman of sense as well as beauty. Very well, I shall give you time to appreciate the advantages of my proposal. I have arranged accommodations for you at the Silver Moon Hotel, where you may consider your options at leisure. The Silver Moon Hotel was the finest establishment in Silver Creek, but Isabella felt no relief at the luxurious surroundings. She was still a prisoner, albeit in a gilded cage. As Judge Caldwell escorted her to an elegant suite of rooms, she tried to assess her situation with the same analytical mind that had helped her manage her father's business affairs. She was alone in an unfamiliar place with limited money and no connections. Judge Caldwell clearly had significant power in Silver Creek, which meant that appealing to local authorities was unlikely to help. She needed allies, but how could she find them when she was trapped under false identity in a web of lies? I trust you will find these accommodations suitable, Judge Caldwell said as he showed her around the suite. I have taken the liberty of arranging for appropriate attire to be delivered. A woman of your refinement deserves clothing that reflects her proper station. Isabella forced herself to smile graciously while inwardly recoiling at the implications of his words. He was already treating her as his possession, making decisions about her clothing and circumstances without consulting her wishes. You are very thoughtful, Isabella managed to say. When might I have the pleasure of meeting the mining gentleman mentioned in the original advertisement? I should like to apologize for any inconvenience my change in plans might cause him. Judge Caldwell's expression grew cold for just a moment before the polished smile returned. I'm afraid that won't be necessary. The gentleman in question has other concerns at present, legal matters that require his full attention. There was something ominous in the way he said it that made Isabella wonder what kind of legal troubles the mysterious mine owner might be facing and whether Judge Caldwell was involved in creating those troubles. That evening, alone in her luxurious prison, Isabella stood at the window of her suite and looked out at the bustling streets of Silver Creek. Somewhere in this rough mountain town was the man she had originally come to meet. Was he a willing participant in Judge Caldwell's scheme? Or was he another victim of whatever game the judge was playing? More importantly, could he be an ally in her desperate need to escape? The next morning brought Isabella's first glimpse of hope since her arrival in Silver Creek. She was taking breakfast in the hotel dining room when a commotion in the street caught her attention. Through the window, she could see a man arguing with several official-looking individuals near what appeared to be a mine entrance on the hillside above the town. Even at a distance, Isabella could see that the man commanded respect and attention. He stood with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority, but there was something in his posture that spoke of barely controlled anger. When he turned slightly, Isabella caught sight of his profile and felt her breath catch in her throat. This was not the grizzled old prospector she had been expecting. This man was perhaps 40 years of age, tall and powerfully built, and with dark hair and features that would have been devastatingly handsome, if not for the terrible scars that marked the left side of his face and neck. "That's Nathan Cross," said a voice behind Isabella, and she turned to see Judge Caldwell approaching her table with his usual calculating smile. "The gentleman I mentioned in yesterday. As you can see, he has his hands quite full with legal difficulties at present." Isabella watched as Nathan Cross gestured emphatically at the officials, his movements sharp with frustration. "What sort of legal difficulties?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Mining claims can be complicated matters," Judge Caldwell said smoothly, settling into the chair across from her, without invitation. "Paperwork gets misplaced, boundaries become disputed, ownership transfers are questioned. Mr. Cross seems to be having trouble proving his legitimate ownership of the Silver Moon mine." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in Isabella's mind. Judge Caldwell had not simply changed the terms of the marriage arrangement. He had orchestrated a scheme to steal Nathan Cross's mine, using her supposed marriage as some form of legal cover. "How unfortunate for him," Isabella said carefully, maintaining her Irish accent, while her Spanish-trained mind raced through the implications of what she was learning. "Indeed," Judge Caldwell agreed, "which is why it's so fortunate that I can offer you a much more stable and secure arrangement. A woman of your refinement deserves a husband whose financial position is unassailable." Isabella looked out the window again and saw Nathan Cross stalking away from the mine entrance, his jaw set with determination despite whatever setback he had just suffered. There was something about his bearing, his refusal to be intimidated by whatever pressures were being brought against him, that reminded her of her father's better qualities, the strength and pride that came from honest work and legitimate accomplishment. "Judge Caldwell," Isabella said, making a decision that surprised even her, "I wonder if it might be possible for me to meet Mr. Cross simply to apologize for any confusion my arrival might have caused. It seems only proper." Judge Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "I hardly think that would be appropriate, my dear. Mr. Cross is not in a frame of mind to receive visitors at present. His troubles have made him rather short-tempered and unpredictable." But Isabella had not survived years of managing her father's social and political obligations without learning to read between the lines of polite refusals. Judge Caldwell was afraid to let her meet Nathan Cross, which meant the mine owner represented a threat to whatever scheme the judge was orchestrating. "Of course," Isabella said with apparent submission, "I defer to your judgment in such matters." But privately, Isabella Rodriguez was already planning her next move. If Judge Caldwell was so determined to keep her away from Nathan Cross, then Nathan Cross was exactly the person she needed to meet. That afternoon, while Judge Caldwell attended to his judicial duties, Isabella convinced Maria to accompany her on a walk through Silver Creek's business district. It was easy enough to lose their escort, a hotel employee who had been assigned to ensure their safety, but who was clearly meant to monitor their movements in the crowded streets. Isabella had learned the location of Nathan Cross's mine from overheard conversations in the hotel lobby, and she made her way up the winding mountain path with the determination of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The Silver Moon mine was an impressive operation, with multiple entrances carved into the mountainside and sturdy buildings that spoke of significant investment and careful planning. But the usual bustle of mining activity was absent, replaced by an ominous quiet that suggested the operation had been shut down. Isabella found Nathan Cross in what appeared to be the mine office, bent over a desk covered with legal documents and surveyor's maps. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window illuminated the terrible scars that marked his face and neck, but it also revealed the intelligence and determination in his dark eyes. "Mr. Cross," Isabella called softly from the doorway, not wanting to startle him. Nathan looked up, and Isabella felt the full impact of his gaze as it settled on her. His eyes were the deep brown of rich earth, marked by pain, but not defeated by it. When he saw her, those eyes filled with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You must be Miss O'Sullivan," Nathan said, rising from his chair with careful courtesy. "I heard you had arrived in town. I'm sorry I wasn't able to meet you at the depot as originally planned." His voice was rough with emotion and fatigue, but there was genuine regret in it. This was not a man who had callously abandoned his responsibilities, but one who had been prevented from fulfilling them. Mr. Cross, Isabella said, stepping into the office and dropping her Irish accent for the first time since leaving California. I think we need to talk. Nathan's eyebrows rose at the change in her speech, but he gestured for her to take a seat without comment. I suspect you're right, Miss O'Sullivan. Or should I call you something else? Isabella felt a moment of panic at being so easily detected, then decided that honesty might be her only hope of escape. My real name is Isabella Rodriguez. I'm not Irish. I'm not looking for marriage for the usual reasons, and I suspect we're both victims of the same man's scheme. Nathan leaned back in his chair and studied her with renewed interest. Judge Harrison Caldwell. Judge Harrison Caldwell, Isabella confirmed, though I suspect you know more about his plans than I do. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his scarred features unreadable as he considered her words. Miss Rodriguez, he said finally, how much do you know about mining law in Colorado Territory? Very little, Isabella admitted, but I know quite a lot about legal manipulation and financial fraud. My father was involved in complex business dealings that required careful navigation of both Mexican and American law. Nathan nodded as if this explained something important. Then you'll understand when I tell you that Judge Caldwell has been systematically challenging every aspect of my claim to this mine. Surveyors' reports have been lost, ownership documents have been questioned, and federal mining inspectors have suddenly found violations that never existed before. And my supposed marriage to you was meant to legitimize his claim somehow. Marriage creates certain legal rights and responsibilities, Nathan explained grimly. If you had married me and then died tragically, mining accidents are unfortunately common, your estate would have passed to your next of kin. With no family in the area, that estate would have been administered by the local courts over which Judge Caldwell has significant influence. Isabella felt sick as the full scope of the judge's plan became clear. She had not simply been intended as an unwilling bride, but as an unwilling widow whose death would provide legal cover for theft on a massive scale. How many other women has he done this to? Isabella asked, though she dreaded the answer. Nathan's expression grew even grimmer. At least 3 that I know of. All young women who answered marriage advertisements, all supposedly died in accidents within months of their arrivals, and all left estates that somehow ended up benefiting Judge Caldwell's associates. Isabella closed her eyes and tried to process the magnitude of what she had stumbled into. Then we're both in terrible danger. You are, Nathan agreed. I'm already marked for death. The mine accident that scarred me was Caldwell's first attempt to eliminate me. He's been trying to find a legal way to steal what he couldn't take by force. Isabella opened her eyes and looked at this man who had already survived one murder attempt and was facing another. Then why are you still here? Why haven't you fled somewhere safe? Nathan's smile was grim but determined, because this mine represents 15 years of my life, Miss Rodriguez. Every tunnel, every support beam, every ounce of silver that's been extracted from this mountain represents blood, sweat, and honest work. I won't let a corrupt judge and his cronies steal what I've built with my own hands. Isabella found herself admiring his courage, even as she feared for both their lives. What do you plan to do? I'm not sure yet, Nathan admitted, but I know I can't do it alone. Caldwell has too much influence, too many connections. I need allies, evidence, and a legal strategy that he won't see coming. Isabella looked around the mine office, taking in the maps and documents that represented Nathan's life work, then back at the man who refused to surrender what was rightfully his. Mr. Cross, what would you say if I told you I might be able to help with all 3 of those things? Nathan studied her with renewed intensity. I'd say that you're either the answer to my prayers or the most dangerous woman in Colorado Territory. Possibly both. Isabella smiled, and for the first time since fleeing her father's house, she felt like herself again. Not Mary O'Sullivan, the helpless mail-order bride, but Isabella Rodriguez, daughter of one of California's most successful businessmen, and heiress to a fortune built on intelligence, determination, and the courage to take calculated risks. Mr. Cross, she said, I think it's time we turned the tables on Judge Caldwell, but first you need to know exactly who you're dealing with. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the Colorado mountains, Isabella Rodriguez began to tell Nathan Cross the truth about her identity, her family's wealth and influence, and the resources she could bring to bear in their fight against corruption and greed. Neither of them knew that their alliance would become something deeper and more precious than simple mutual assistance. Neither suspected that their shared danger would forge bonds that transcended their different backgrounds and cultures. All they knew was that separately they were vulnerable to Judge Caldwell's schemes, but together they might have a chance to not only survive, but triumph. The game was about to change, and Isabella Rodriguez intended to make sure she and Nathan Cross were the ones writing the new rules. The next 3 days passed in a carefully choreographed dance of deception as Isabella played the role of the compliant potential bride while secretly working with Nathan to gather evidence against Judge Caldwell. Their clandestine meetings in the mine office became the highlight of Isabella's days, not just because of their shared mission, but because of the growing connection she felt with the scarred, determined man who refused to surrender his life's work. Nathan Cross was unlike any man Isabella had ever known. He possessed her father's business acumen and her late brother's courage, but there was something more, a gentleness beneath his stern exterior that emerged when he thought no one was watching, a depth of character that had been forged in the crucible of honest work and genuine hardship. "Tell me about the accident," Isabella said on their third afternoon together as she helped him organize legal documents that might support his claim to the mine. They had moved beyond formal address necessity and shared danger, creating an intimacy that made Mr. Cross and Miss Rodriguez seem absurdly distant. Nathan's hand moved unconsciously to the scarred side of his face, a gesture Isabella had noticed he made whenever the subject of his injuries arose. It wasn't an accident, at least not the kind Caldwell claims it was. Isabella set down the papers she had been sorting and gave him her full attention. Over the past few days, she had learned to read the subtle changes in Nathan's expression, the way his jaw tightened when he was struggling with painful memories, the way his eyes grew distant when he was remembering things he would rather forget. "It was 6 months ago," Nathan continued, his voice carefully controlled. "I was inspecting a new section of tunnel when the supports gave way. But the thing is, those supports had been checked just hours before. They were solid, properly braced, built to last for years. But someone had weakened them." Nathan nodded grimly. "Deliberately, precisely. Cut just enough to fail under stress, but not enough to be immediately obvious. If I had been deeper in the tunnel when it happened, or if my foreman hadn't heard the cave-in and dug me out so quickly." Isabella felt a chill as she imagined Nathan trapped beneath tons of rock and debris fighting for his life, while Judge Caldwell waited to claim his mine. "You could have been killed. That was the idea. When I survived but was too injured to actively manage the mine," Caldwell began his legal challenges. "He probably thought the injuries would break my spirit, make me willing to sell for whatever he offered rather than fight." Isabella studied Nathan's scarred but resolute features and felt a surge of admiration for his courage. "He misjudged you. He misjudged both of us," Nathan replied, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "He expected a broken man and a helpless woman. Instead, he got two people who refused to surrender to his schemes." There was something in the way Nathan looked at her that went beyond mere partnership in their fight against Judge Caldwell. Isabella had seen that look in men's eyes before. Desire, attraction, the beginning of deeper feelings. But this was different. Nathan looked at her as if he saw not just her beauty, but her intelligence, her strength, her worth as an equal partner in their dangerous enterprise. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "Nathan," Isabella said carefully, "what happens after we stop Caldwell? Assuming we succeed, what happens then?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the window where the afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "I suppose you'll go back to California. Return to your family, reclaim your real identity. And you'll go back to mining silver and living alone on your mountain." "That was the plan," Nathan admitted. "Before." "Before what?" Nathan turned back to look at her, and Isabella saw vulnerability in his expression that he had never shown before. "Before I met a woman who could match my father's business sense, organize legal documents better than most lawyers, and face down danger with more courage than half the men in Colorado Territory." Isabella felt her breath catch at the admiration and growing affection in his voice. "Nathan." "I know it's impossible," Nathan said quickly, as if he feared she would reject what he hadn't yet fully expressed. "You're Spanish nobility. I'm a scarred mine owner. You have a fortune waiting for you in California. I have a hole in a mountain that may or may not survive Judge Caldwell's attacks. You could have any man you choose, and I—" He gestured at his scarred face with bitter self-deprecation. Isabella stood and moved to where Nathan sat, reaching out to gently touch the scarred side of his face. He flinched at first, then stilled as her fingers traced the mark of his near-death experience with tender care. Nathan Cross, Isabella said softly, do you think scars make you less worthy of love? Do you think I care more about a few marks on your skin than I do about the courage and integrity of the man who bears them? Nathan's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Isabella, you can't mean... I mean that in the past 3 days I've come to respect and admire you more than any man I've ever known. I mean that when I look at you, I see not scars but strength, not damage but determination. I mean that the thought of returning to California and never seeing you again is more frightening than anything Judge Caldwell might do to us. Nathan reached up and covered her hand with his own, his touch gentle despite the calluses that marked years of hard work. Are you saying you might consider staying in Colorado, building a life here? Isabella felt her heart racing as she realized the magnitude of what she was contemplating. I'm saying that I might consider staying anywhere you are if you wanted me to. The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative, as if Nathan couldn't quite believe that someone like Isabella would willingly give her heart to someone like him. But as Isabella responded with all the passion and certainty she felt, Nathan's touch grew more confident, more possessive, more full of the hope that had been growing between them since their first meeting. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and looking at each other with wonder. Isabella, Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion, I think I'm falling in love with you. I think I'm already there, Isabella replied, then laughed at the joy and amazement in Nathan's expression. Did you think I was helping you fight Judge Caldwell purely out of civic duty? I thought you were helping me because you're a good person who doesn't tolerate corruption and fraud. Well, that too, Isabella admitted, but mostly I'm helping you because the thought of letting Judge Caldwell destroy you is unacceptable to me, because you've become too important to my happiness for me to let anyone hurt you. Their second kiss was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching the mine office. Nathan immediately moved to the window, his expression growing grim as he saw who was coming up the mountain path. Judge Caldwell, Nathan reported grimly, and he's not alone. 3 men with him, all armed. Isabella felt fear spike through her contentment as the reality of their situation reasserted itself. He must have discovered that I've been meeting with you. Nathan moved quickly to his desk and began gathering the most important documents they had been reviewing. We need to get out of here. There's a back entrance to the mine that leads to a trail down the far side of the mountain. Nathan, wait. Isabella grabbed his arm as he started toward the back of the office. What if we don't run? What if we face him here together? We have evidence of his fraud, proof of his scheme to steal your mine. Maybe it's time to stop hiding and start fighting back. Nathan looked at her as if she had lost her mind. Isabella, he has 3 armed men with him. This isn't a courtroom debate. He's here to eliminate witnesses. Then let's make sure there are too many witnesses for him to eliminate quietly. Isabella moved to the front window and waved cheerfully at the approaching riders, then called out in her assumed Irish accent, Judge Caldwell, how wonderful to see you. Nathan stared at her in amazement as she opened the front door and stepped out to greet their enemies with apparent delight. Miss O'Sullivan, Judge Caldwell said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. What are you doing here? Oh, I was just exploring the area, Isabella replied with convincing innocence. Mr. Cross was kind enough to show me around his mine. Such fascinating work, I had no idea silver mining was so complex. Isabella could see the calculation in Judge Caldwell's eyes as he weighed his options. He had clearly come to eliminate both her and Nathan, but her friendly greeting and public acknowledgement of their meeting had complicated his plans. Any violence now would be difficult to explain away as an accident. Miss O'Sullivan, Judge Caldwell said with forced politeness, I really must insist that you return to town immediately. This is no place for a lady, and Mr. Cross has important business to attend to. What sort of business? Isabella asked with wide-eyed curiosity that masked her racing heart. Perhaps I could be of assistance. I have some experience with legal matters. Judge Caldwell's companions were growing restless, clearly expecting violence, and uncertain how to proceed with Isabella's cheerful interference. Their leader was a hard-faced man Isabella recognized as the type of hired killer who populated the worst parts of San Francisco's waterfront. Miss O'Sullivan, Nathan said, stepping out of the office to stand beside her. Perhaps Judge Caldwell is right. This is dangerous country, and you should return to safety. But Isabella had spotted movement on the trail below them, other riders approaching at a gallop. "Oh, look," she said with apparent delight. "More visitors. How popular your mine is today, Mr. Cross." The new arrivals were a group of miners and townspeople led by a man Isabella recognized as the hotel clerk from Silver Creek. They rode up to the mine office with the urgency of people bringing important news. "Mr. Cross," the hotel clerk called out as he dismounted, "we've been looking all over for you. There's been developments in your legal case. Federal officials arrived in town this morning with new documentation about your mining claims." Judge Caldwell's face went pale as the implications of this announcement became clear. Federal involvement meant his local influence would be useless. His carefully constructed legal challenges would be scrutinized by authorities beyond his control. "What sort of federal officials?" Judge Caldwell demanded, his polished manner cracking under pressure. "Mining inspectors from the territorial capital," the hotel clerk replied. "They have orders to conduct a complete review of all disputed claims in the Silver Creek area. Said there have been irregularities reported that require federal investigation." Isabella felt a surge of triumph as she realized what must have happened. Nathan's correspondence with territorial authorities was finally bearing fruit, and Judge Caldwell's schemes were about to be exposed to federal scrutiny. "Irregularities," one of Judge Caldwell's companions asked nervously. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that involve falsified documents, intimidation of rightful claim holders, and suspicious accidents," Nathan said grimly, stepping forward to face Judge Caldwell directly. "The kind that federal authorities take very seriously." Judge Caldwell's hand moved toward his gun, but the presence of so many witnesses made violence impossible. His carefully laid plans were collapsing around him, and everyone present could see the desperation in his eyes. "You have no proof," Judge Caldwell snarled, his polished facade finally cracking completely. "No evidence that would stand up in a federal court." "Actually," Isabella said sweetly, "I think we do." She reached into her bag and pulled out a leather portfolio containing the documents she and Nathan had been organizing for the past 3 days. "It's amazing what kinds of records people keep when they're committing fraud. Bills of sale for falsified surveys correspondence about planned accidents, payments to men who specialize in making problems disappear." "Where did you get those?" Judge Caldwell demanded, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "From your own files," Isabella replied calmly. "Amazing how careless people become when they think they're dealing with a helpless Irish girl instead of someone who actually knows how to read legal documents." Nathan stared at Isabella in amazement. "You searched his files?" "While he was in court yesterday," Isabella confirmed. "Maria created a distraction at the hotel while I paid a visit to the judge's private office. Turns out he kept very detailed records of his various schemes. I suppose he wanted to make sure all his associates paid their proper shares of the profits." Judge Caldwell's face had gone from pale to purple with rage. "You little thief, you had no right to gather evidence of your crimes," Isabella interrupted. "I think federal investigators will disagree with you about that." The sound of more horses approaching drew everyone's attention to the trail where a new group of riders was making its way up to the mine. These men wore the badges and uniforms of federal marshals, and their leader carried an official-looking document case. "Judge Harrison Caldwell," the lead marshal called out as he dismounted. "I'm Marshal William Thompson, Territorial Mining Authority. We need to speak with you about irregularities in your handling of disputed mining claims in this district." Judge Caldwell's shoulders sagged as he realized his game was finally over. His hired gunmen were already backing away, unwilling to face federal charges for a scheme that was clearly collapsing. "This isn't over," Judge Caldwell said venomously as the marshals approached. "You may have won this round, but I have connections you can't imagine. Influence that reaches—" "Judge Caldwell," Marshal Thompson interrupted, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and corruption in office. You have the right to remain silent." As the marshals led Judge Caldwell away in chains, Isabella felt a mixture of relief, triumph, and exhaustion. The immediate danger was over, but the emotional toll of the past weeks was catching up with her. "Isabella," Nathan said softly, moving to stand beside her as they watched their enemy being taken away. "How did you know the federal investigators were coming? How did you time everything so perfectly?" Isabella smiled and pulled a telegram from her bag. I sent word to my father 3 days ago asking him to use his political connections to request a federal investigation. Don Carlos Rodriguez has more influence with territorial authorities than Judge Caldwell ever dreamed of. Nathan read the telegram and began to laugh. So, Judge Caldwell was brought down by the very Spanish nobility connections he thought he could manipulate. Poetic justice, Isabella agreed. He assumed I was a helpless Irish immigrant instead of the daughter of one of California's most powerful families. His prejudices became his downfall. As the crowd of townspeople began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the day's dramatic events, Nathan and Isabella found themselves alone again outside the mine office. The crisis that had brought them together was over, but the feelings that had grown between them remained. So, Nathan said, his voice carefully casual, what happens now? Do you return to California and reclaim your inheritance? Isabella looked at the man who had captured her heart with his courage and integrity, then at the mountains that had become more beautiful to her than any vista in her native California. That depends, Isabella said, moving closer to Nathan and taking his scarred hands in hers, on whether a certain mine owner would be interested in a business partner who happens to have extensive experience with complex legal and financial matters. Nathan's smile was brighter than any silver he had ever extracted from his mountain. Are you proposing a merger, Miss Rodriguez? I'm proposing a partnership, Isabella replied, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. In business and life, in everything that matters. Then I accept, Nathan said, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around in a gesture of pure joy. Though I should warn you, I come with mining claims stubborn independence and a face that frightens small children. And I come with a Spanish temper, more money than is probably good for me, and a father who will want to meet any man serious about marrying his daughter. Isabella laughed. Your father, Nathan said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her, is going to meet me eventually. Oh yes, Isabella said with cheerful certainty. Don Carlos Rodriguez will want to inspect the man who captured his daughter's heart. But don't worry, I think he'll approve. After all, you're honest, hard-working, and you've proven you can protect me from corrupt judges and hired gunmen. What more could a father want in a son-in-law? As they stood together in the afternoon sunlight surrounded by the mountains where they had found both love and justice, Nathan and Isabella began to plan their future. It would be a life that combined his knowledge of mining with her business expertise, his Colorado mountain home with her California family connections, his quiet strength with her passionate determination. It would be a life built on equality, respect, and the kind of love that transcended cultural differences and social expectations. Most importantly, it would be a life they had chosen together, free from the manipulations and schemes of those who would use them for their own purposes. The Silver Moon Mine would prosper under their joint management, but it would be only the beginning of their shared enterprise. Together, they would build an empire based not on exploitation and corruption, but on honest work and mutual respect. And if anyone doubted that a Spanish heiress and a scarred mine owner could find happiness together, they had only to see Nathan and Isabella Cross working side by side, their love as enduring as the mountains where they had found each other. 3 months after Judge Caldwell's arrest, Isabella stood on the porch of the modest cabin that Nathan had built as temporary quarters while they planned their permanent home. The autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the aspen trees had turned the mountainsides into a tapestry of gold and crimson that took her breath away every morning. Señorita Tui, Maria called from inside the cabin. The wagon is approaching. I believe it is your father. Isabella's heart leaped with a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she saw the dust cloud rising from the trail below. Don Carlos Rodriguez's telegram had arrived a week ago, announcing his intention to visit Colorado territory and meet the man who had captured his daughter's affections. It would be the first time Isabella had seen her father since fleeing California, and she was uncertain how he would react to the choices she had made. Nathan emerged from the mine office, brushing dust from his clothes and running a hand through his dark hair. The scars that marked his face had faded somewhat over the past months, but more importantly, the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by the confidence of a man who had won his battles and found his happiness. Are you ready for this? Nathan asked, moving to stand beside Isabella as they watched the approaching entourage. As ready as anyone can be to introduce her father to the man she loves, Isabella replied, taking Nathan's hand and drawing strength from his steady presence. Remember, he's not as intimidating as he pretends to be. Underneath all the Spanish grandee authority, he's just a father who wants his daughter to be happy. The Rodriguez entourage was impressive even by Colorado Territory standards. Don Carlos traveled with a dozen vaqueros pack animals loaded with supplies and enough ceremonial display to announce the arrival of California royalty. As the party drew closer, Isabella could see her father riding at the head of the group, his bearing as regal as ever, despite the dusty frontier clothes he had adopted for the journey. Don Carlos Rodriguez was a man who commanded attention without effort. Tall, silver-haired, and possessed of the natural authority that came from generations of Spanish nobility, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. But Isabella had inherited her intelligence and strength from this man, and she knew that beneath his intimidating exterior lay a shrewd mind and a loving heart. Isabella, mi hija, Don Carlos said, as he dismounted from his magnificent stallion, his voice thick with emotion as he gathered his daughter into his arms. Let me look at you. Are you well happy? Very well, Papa, Isabella replied, reverting to Spanish for the first time in months, and happier than I've ever been in my life. Don Carlos held her at arm's length, studying her face with the keen perception that had made him one of California's most successful businessmen. What he saw there must have satisfied him because his stern expression softened with approval. You have chosen well, I think, Don Carlos said quietly, then turned to Nathan with the assessing gaze of a man evaluating a potential son-in-law. And you, Senor Cross, are the man who has won my daughter's heart. Nathan stepped forward, meeting Don Carlos's gaze directly despite the obvious intimidation of facing one of the most powerful men in California. I am, sir, and I hope to prove myself worthy of the honor. Isabella held her breath as her father and the man she loved took each other's measure. This first meeting would set the tone for everything that followed, and she knew that Nathan's future relationship with her family depended on the impression he made in these crucial moments. Tell me about your mine, Don Carlos said after a long moment of silent assessment. Then, Isabella's letters speak of silver deposits and federal investigations, but I would hear the details from the man who built the operation. As Nathan began to describe the Silver Moon Mine's history and prospects, Isabella watched her father's expression carefully. Don Carlos had not built his fortune by accepting surface appearances, and she could see him evaluating not just Nathan's words, but his bearing, his knowledge, his character. Federal investigations, Don Carlos mused when Nathan finished his explanation. Such things can be expensive and time-consuming even when one has done nothing wrong. They can, Nathan agreed, but sometimes they're necessary to ensure justice is served and corruption is exposed. And you were willing to risk everything, your mind, your livelihood, your life, to fight this corruption. Nathan glanced at Isabella, then back at her father. I was willing to risk everything to protect what was mine by right and to prevent Judge Caldwell from harming innocent people, including your daughter. Don Carlos nodded slowly, and Isabella saw approval growing in his dark eyes. A man must be willing to fight for what matters to him. But tell me, Senor Cross, or what are your intentions regarding my daughter's future? Papa, Isabella began, but Don Carlos silenced her with a gentle gesture. This is between men, mi hija. Let Senor Cross answer for himself. Nathan straightened his shoulders, and Isabella saw the steel beneath his quiet manner as he prepared to face the most important question of his life. Don Carlos, I love your daughter with all my heart. I want to marry her, build a life with her, give her the respect and partnership she deserves. But I also know that she comes from a world of wealth and privilege that I can't match. All I can offer is honest work, faithful love, and the promise that I will spend my life trying to be worthy of her. Don Carlos was silent for a long moment, his weathered features revealing nothing of his thoughts. Then, to Isabella's amazement, he began to smile. Senor Cross, Don Carlos said, extending his hand to Nathan, any man who can inspire my headstrong daughter to flee California, assume a false identity, and fight corrupt judges while maintaining her dignity, and courage is a man worthy of respect. Any man who can look me in the eye and speak honestly about his limitations while declaring his love is a man of honor. You have my permission to marry Isabella with my blessing and my full support. Isabella felt tears of joy and relief streaming down her face as Nathan and her father shook hands, sealing an agreement that went far deeper than mere parental permission. This was the joining of two families, two cultures, two ways of life that would blend to create something new and stronger. However, Don Carlos continued, his smile becoming broader. If you think I am going to allow my only daughter to live in this frontier cabin while you build your empire, you are sadly mistaken. Isabella deserves a home worthy of her station, and I intend to ensure she has one. Nathan looked alarmed at the implications of Don Carlos's words. Sir, I appreciate your generosity, but I insist on providing for Isabella myself. I won't be kept by my wife's family fortune. And I respect that pride, Don Carlos replied approvingly. But what if I told you that Isabella's dowry could be invested in expanding your mining operations? What if I offered not charity but partnership in a venture that could benefit both our families? Isabella watched Nathan's face carefully as he considered her father's proposition. She knew how important his independence was to him, but she also knew that Don Carlos was offering genuine partnership rather than condescending charity. What kind of partnership? Nathan asked cautiously. The kind where Rodriguez family resources combine with cross-family expertise to build the largest and most successful mining operation in Colorado territory. Don Carlos replied, I have capital and political connections. You have knowledge and mining claims. Together we could accomplish far more than either of us could achieve alone. Nathan looked at Isabella, seeking her opinion on her father's proposal. What do you think? Would a partnership with your family compromise our independence? Isabella smiled, understanding that Nathan was asking not just about business arrangements, but about the fundamental nature of their future relationship. I think a true partnership is one where each party contributes their strengths for the benefit of all. I think my father is offering to help us build something magnificent together. Then I accept, Nathan said, turning back to Don Carlos, with gratitude and the promise that your investment will be honored and protected. Excellent, Don Carlos declared, clapping Nathan on the shoulder. Now let us discuss the practical matters. The wedding, for instance, and the house we shall build for the newlyweds. Over the following week, as Don Carlos's extended visit transformed the quiet mining camp into a bustling center of activity, Isabella marveled at how naturally her two worlds began to blend together. Her father's vaqueros worked alongside Nathan's miners to expand the mine's operations. Maria and the camp's existing cook collaborated to create meals that combined Spanish and frontier influences. Plans were drawn for a grand house that would be worthy of a Rodriguez daughter, while reflecting the practical needs of a working mine. Most importantly, Isabella watched her father and Nathan develop genuine respect and affection for each other. Despite their different backgrounds and cultures, both men shared the same values: integrity, hard work, family loyalty, and the courage to stand up for what was right. He is a good man, Don Carlos told Isabella one evening as they walked together through the mining camp. Strong, honorable, intelligent, your mother would have approved. Isabella felt her heart clench with old pain at the mention of her mother who had died when Isabella was 15. I wish she could have met him, Papa. I think they would have understood each other. She would have seen what I see, Don Carlos replied gently. A man who loves her daughter not for her fortune or her beauty, but for her courage and her spirit. A man who will be her partner in all things, not her master or her keeper. Is that really what you see when you look at Nathan? Isabella asked, needing her father's honest assessment. Don Carlos stopped walking and turned to face his daughter directly. Isabella, when your mother died, I worried that you would never find a man worthy of the love you had to give. You are too intelligent to be satisfied with a weak man, too independent to submit to a tyrannical one, too passionate to be happy with someone who could not match your fire. In Nathan Cross you have found your equal. Treasure that, mihija. It is rarer than silver or gold. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning with the entire mining camp in attendance, along with dignitaries who had traveled from across Colorado territory to witness the marriage of Don Carlos Rodriguez's daughter. Isabella wore her mother's mantilla and carried wildflowers from the mountain meadows, while Nathan wore a suit that had been specially tailored in Denver for the occasion. The ceremony itself was conducted in both Spanish and English, reflecting the blending of cultures that would characterize the couple's entire life together. When Nathan placed the ring on Isabella's finger and promised to love and cherish her for all the days of their lives, Isabella felt that her heart might burst with happiness. Senora Cross, Nathan said softly as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. Are you ready for this adventure? Senor Cross, Isabella replied, with a smile that outshone the autumn sunlight. I've been ready since the moment I met you. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days and became the stuff of legend throughout Colorado territory. Don Carlos had spared no expense in honoring his daughter's marriage, importing musicians from California, delicacies from Mexico, and wines from Spain. But the most memorable moments were the simple ones. Nathan and Isabella dancing to Mexican guitars under the star-filled mountain sky. Don Carlos toasting his new son-in-law in both Spanish and English, Maria, crying tears of joy as she watched the girl she had helped raise find true happiness at last. As the festivities finally wound down and Don Carlos prepared to return to California, Isabella felt both sadness at her father's departure and excitement about the future she would build with Nathan. They stood together on the porch of their temporary cabin, watching the Rodriguez entourage disappear into the morning mist. "Are you going to miss California?" Nathan asked, his arm around Isabella's waist as they contemplated their new life together. "I'm going to miss my father," Isabella admitted. "But California was never really home to me. This is home, here with you, building something that belongs to both of us." Nathan turned her in his arms, his dark eyes serious with love and determination. "Isabella, I promise you won't regret choosing this life. I may not be able to give you the luxury you were born to, but I will give you everything I have. My love, my loyalty, my partnership in all things." Isabella silenced him with a kiss, then pulled back to look into his beloved scarred face. "Nathan Cross, you have already given me something more precious than luxury. You've given me the freedom to be myself, to use my intelligence and strength as your partner rather than your ornament. You've given me a love based on respect and equality. What more could any woman want?" As they stood together watching the sun rise over their mountain kingdom, Isabella reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had begun as a pampered Spanish heiress, fleeing an arranged marriage, had become Mary O'Sullivan, the desperate mail-order bride, and had finally emerged as Isabella Cross, equal partner to the man she loved, and co-owner of one of Colorado Territory's most promising mining operations. The months and years that followed proved that their happiness was built on solid foundations. The Silver Moon Mine prospered under their joint management, becoming not just a source of wealth, but a model of fair labor practices and environmental responsibility. Isabella's business acumen complemented Nathan's technical knowledge perfectly, while her linguistic skills and cultural connections opened new markets for their silver. They built the grand house that Don Carlos had envisioned, but they designed it as a working ranch house that would accommodate not just their own family, but the extended community of miners, their families and visitors that their success attracted. Isabella established the first school in silver farming, teaching the children of miners in 3 languages and ensuring that the next generation would have opportunities their parents had never known. Nathan's scars faded with time and happiness, but more importantly, the emotional wounds that had made him doubt his worth healed completely under Isabella's love and respect. He never again questioned whether he deserved happiness or whether a woman could love him for who he truly was. And when their first child was born, a daughter with Isabella's dark eyes and Nathan's determined chin, they named her Esperanza, which meant hope because she represented all the dreams they had built together in their mountain paradise. Don Carlos visited every year, delighting in his granddaughter and taking immense pride in the empire that Isabella and Nathan built together. He lived to see them expand from mining into cattle ranching, into banking, into the railroad business that connected Colorado Territory to the wider world. But perhaps his greatest satisfaction came from seeing his daughter's continued happiness with the man she had chosen. Isabella and Nathan never lost the partnership and passionate equality that had drawn them together, never allowed success, or time, or the challenges of building a frontier empire to diminish the love that was the foundation of everything they accomplished. Years later, when Isabella was an old woman, surrounded by children and grandchildren, she would still smile when she thought about that desperate young woman who had fled California in disguise, seeking only safety and finding instead the greatest love of her life. She had gambled everything on a false identity and a dangerous deception and had won a life beyond her wildest dreams. No regrets. Nathan would still ask sometimes when they sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint their mountains in shades of silver and gold. Only one, Isabella, would reply with the same smile that had captured his heart so many years before. "I regret that I waited so long to become brave enough to choose my own fate, but I'll never regret choosing you." And in the distance, the mountains of Colorado would echo with the laughter of their descendants, carrying forward the legacy of two people who had proven that love could indeed conquer all. Prejudice, corruption, cultural differences, and even the scars that life leaves on every human heart.